Hello, fellow humans. I saw the word degrowth for the first time in the book Less is More: How Degrowth Will Save the World by Jason Hickel, which I read in 2020. It really intrigued me, but I did not fully internalize its complete meaning at that time. Soon after, I came across another book, More from Less: The Surprising Story of How We Learn to Prosper Using Fewer Resources and What Happens Next by Andrew McAfee. These two books have somewhat similar titles, but are in fact in strong contradiction. Jason Hickel shows how the obsession with economic growth is unsustainable and why we must drop it. Andrew McAfee says that we can use the so-called green growth and innovation to solve the climate crisis and achieve more prosperity. In this episode, I would like to explore why Jason Hickel is right and Andrew McAfee is wrong. Chapter 1. The word degrowth. To explore the meaning of degrowth, I will use another book actually titled Exploring Degrowth, A Critical Guide by Vincent Liéger and Anitra Nelson. What is growth in the first place? Growthism, or the ideology of growth, is the belief that more is always better and enough does not suffice. Capitalism has infected politics with this obsession. You see the vast majority of politicians promoting economic growth, which is the same as GDP growth, often as their number one priority. This obsession with growth is causing the monumental destruction of entire ecosystems and is making Earth uninhabitable for humans. Degrowth is a planned and democratic reduction of production and consumption in rich countries to lower environmental pressures and inequalities while improving well-being. Degrowth is not the opposite of growth, but rather a call for sufficiency. In my video from last week, I have showed you what sufficiency would mean for somebody living in Canada, for example. A sharp reduction of carbon footprint by 95% by 2050. I encourage you to watch that video. Degrowth was coined as a mere notion in 1972 when sociologist and journalist André Gorz asked a profound question in response to the Limits to Growth report. He asked if global equilibrium was compatible with the survival of the capitalist system, given what Earth's balance required no growth or even degrowth of material production. By the year 2000, the word degrowth was beginning to capture radical opposition to growth. An Adbusser activist group in Lyon feared that the capitalist system was doing greenwashing and was stealing the concept of sustainable development. They read the works of economist Georgescu-Roegen and realized that the French word décroissance can be a powerful tool to radically challenge the limits of growth. The word degrowth is meant to be a provocative slogan against capitalism. It is both a rejection of capitalism and a positive affirmation of a much better alternative that creates a fair distribution of prosperity. Degrowth is not meant to be a permanent working ideology that replaces capitalism. Its immediate purpose is to force the collapse of capitalism and open the door to a very different future. Capitalism emerged in opposition to feudalism. Post-capitalism, by necessity, must also negate capitalism. This can be quite well a positive ontology, not just antagonism to the existing status quo. We must not be afraid to use the word degrowth simply because it challenges the word growth. No matter what name we choose for post-capitalism, by definition it will have attributes and policies that will contradict capitalism. I like the word degrowth precisely for its ontology and semantics. On one hand, it opposes something, namely capitalism and growthism, and on the other hand, it offers something, a positive ontology of well-being and prosperity. Chapter 2. Decolonizing our growth imaginaries. Degrowth aims to decolonize our growth imaginary. Our imagination was effectively colonized, conquered, and subdued by capitalism with its stories and brilliant public relations. This colonization was done with the American dream, the free market lie advanced by globalization, the idea of living large, Consumerism to cover for depression, consumerism to signal social status, accumulation for its own sake, the myth of meritocracy, the myth of rags to riches, the delusion of hard work, the delusion of absolute individual agency, the delusion of the moral superiority of high-income countries over low-income countries. Degrowth seeks to undo all these and liberate our imagination, unlocking incredible potential for equitable freedom for all people. To the surprise of many, degrowth does not come from Marxism specifically, but from physics. In his books, The Entropy Law and the Economic Processes and Energy and Economic Myths, Nicolas Georgescu-Roegen moved from statistics to biology and from physics to economics to reveal the thermodynamic proof that infinite growth on a finite planet is impossible. He also warned about the risks of so-called sustainable development, which he dubbed snake oil. He was the founder of the field of bioeconomics. Now imagine that you live with Earth and Earth lives with you. You are one body. The connection is so strong, you cannot exist without the web of life that skims the skin of the planet. The biosphere is thinner than the lacquer is on the surface of an Earth globe. Surely, Earth can do just fine without humans, but that would be such a boring story to tell. The next leap of imagination is to know that we can live without the notion of economic growth, which is a synonym for the growth of the gross domestic product. GDP growth simply indicates the total amount of production and services traded for dollars, euros, or any national currency. GDP does not even care about any of the environmental and social implications of what it counts. A fire in a chemical factory is good for GDP growth. Cutting forests and making furniture is also good. Hurricanes destroying cities are also good when cities will have to be reconstructed. Manufacturing of weapons are also good, especially when they are used to sustain endless wars. Meanwhile, a very pleasant ride on a bike in the forest is not captured by GDP. Efforts have been made to correct this absurdity, for instance by creating metrics such as the Genuine Progress Indicator, GPI. Decoupling is another word we need to shake our imagination. It refers to the notion that negative environmental implications of production and consumption can be separated from growing the economy. We can do capitalist growth without environmental destruction. The truth is, decoupling cannot happen almost for certain. Here's what this 2019 report from the European Environmental Bureau found. The conclusion is both overwhelmingly clear and sobering. Not only is there no empirical evidence supporting the existence of a decoupling of economic growth from environmental pressures on anywhere near the scale needed to deal with environmental breakdown, but also, and perhaps more importantly, such decoupling appears unlikely to happen in the future. Majid Rahnema, an Iranian diplomat and post-development theorist, showed in his book When Misery Hunts Poverty the sharp contrast between the forced misery of degrading work in capitalism and living modestly in voluntary simplicity. Capitalism forces scarcity and divides widely between polluting rich and depressed poor. Voluntary simple life liberates from this oppression. The rebound effect. As I've talked about in my video about the lifestyle of my fellow Canadians, having better technology, better electric cars, better smartphones, same-day Amazon Prime delivery will not make us consume less things. On the contrary, once we get used to the desire of having the better, newer, faster, more convenient gadgets, we will use more of them. Guess what happens with the old ones? We will drive even more kilometers with an electric car, not less. This adds pressure to the environment, which is the opposite effect of what we want. This is called the rebound effect. Degrowth wants to neutralize this effect by replacing our mental connection to technology with a mental connection to simplicity and meaningful prosperity. French economist Serge Latouche pointed out, advertisements create the desire to consume, credit provides the possibility to do it, and planned obsolescence renews its necessity, work. This way of life is possible also from the way the philosophy of work has brainwashed our imagination. We work to finance a car. We need a car to go to work, to finance a car to go to work. Bernard Maris theorized that the compulsion to accumulate was driven by the fear of death. He said that people unconsciously accumulate stuff to push away death or even buy versions of immortality. Our growth-addicted capitalist system is in denial and cannot admit there are limits and pushes us into a morbid race of always more. The aim of degrowth is to look at work from a perspective of emancipation. It challenges the practice of work to obtain money and profits. Degrowth does not reject work, but it rejects capitalist work. André Gorz, in his classic book Farewell to the Working Class, challenged workers' movements to radically rethink salaried work in favor of activities that were chosen rather than forced. He argued for removing paid work from the center of society. Work has its limits at both ends of the capitalist spectrum, with exploitation at one end and at the other unemployment. And the ultimate scandal is, the more harmful a job is for society, the higher it is paid. New vocabulary. So the transition to post-capitalism will require effectively new words, new imagination, and a new way of talking about our lives, how we work, why we work, how much we work, who benefits from our work, who gets wealthy from work and by how much. Can we get wealthy from the work of others? Chapter 3. Degrowth in practice. Degrowth is not Marxism, is not communism, is not libertarianism. Degrowth can be ideological or not. Most importantly, the degrowth movement is very future-oriented. It draws a roadmap out of growth-driven capitalism towards life satisfaction with much less physical stuff. Non-hierarchical organizing. The future does not need a leader or one specific organization. There's a strong argument for not having a top-down pyramid of a degrowth corporation with the Mr. Degrowth CEO at the top. Capitalism is all about hierarchies of power with unelected rulers sitting at the top. Degrowth wants more democracy, not less. In the early 1970s in Melbourne, Australia, the women's liberation movement had an assembly every Saturday afternoon in a warehouse space. Any woman could attend. At the start of each meeting, a facilitator and a note-taker were elected and an agenda formed from everyone's input. There was no president or secretary. There was no formal spokesperson. The media had to speak with whoever was on duty, who would either pass them on to a specific liberationists or speak themselves for the movement, but in both cases only as a representative. Do we want all organizing to be non-hierarchical? Of course not. The purpose of this example from Australia is that the design of hierarchies of power must be seriously reconsidered. Organizational charts in corporations must be flipped under degrowth. Workers will move at the top of the power and CEOs will be moved at the bottom. Workers will hire and fire managers and executives by democratic consensus. Elected managers will be accountable to the workers, not the other way around. Workers will do the decision-making. Managers will administer decisions. Workers will tell managers what to do, not the opposite. There can be fluid rosters of various forms of decision-making. Never a handful of a few people will be able to decide what to produce or decree mass layoffs. Voluntary simplicity. How can an individual live life according to degrowth? Quite simply, live a life of voluntary simplicity, reducing environmental impact by choice. I talked about last week how many Canadians live with pre-existing conditions that make it difficult to take a radical step towards voluntary simplicity, say refusing to use cars and relying on a bike or walking, or cutting down use of our smartphone. Degrowth is not a moral judge, but rather an invitation for the renovation and upgrade of lifestyles. There are many options, from consuming less to working less. These are individual choices according to individual circumstances, identities, and trends. People do want all the sustainable things that make life cool and interesting. Fashions are being born about what we eat, how many clothes we buy, how much we repair things. The book Degrowth in Movements traces the intricate connections with other such movements, fighting for a good life for all beyond eco-modernism and growth from a social, ecological, and global justice perspective. By the way, eco-modernism is another nonsense idea. The collective sphere features alternative activities based on goals of fair trade and ethical production, from open and transparently run local production of high-quality organic goods to schemes involving non-speculative local and alternative currencies, from local exchange trading systems to barter and no exchange communities, from economies developed on the basis of reciprocity to sharing and gift economies, time banks and solidarity economies, community-based governments, say of the commons, using consensual decision-making, also known as sociocracy or dynamic governance. The sphere of resistance. ZAD in Nantes, France, were hundreds of activists who occupied more than 4,000 acres of land which was to be impacted by a planned airport. This internationally newsworthy blockade of long duration has incorporated a massive variety of social actors, many of whom are involved with or aware of the degrowth movement. Surrounded by up to 4,000 soldiers at a time, the ZAD activists not only defended the land but also started to experiment with and construct on location an alternative utopia with direct democracy, local food production based on agroecology, local markets, and alternative solidarities based on reciprocity and care, low-tech eco-constructions, and energy production. These activities were intentionally emblematic of a commons, the common horizon that we share. The airport mega project was abandoned. Their fight was also for a way of living in common with a new meaning of work. The book has many more examples of political strategies for degrowth. We cannot all live in eco-villages. The main goal of degrowth is to imagine and experiment with conditions for change that ultimately lead to a critical mass supporting post-growth. It starts today with knowing, wanting, and voting laws for universal basic income, maximum income, universal basic services, alternative financial systems, alternative forms of exchange, and other radical ideas. It is totally okay to want these. Once your mind gets used to the ideas, the more you know about them, the more you question them, and the more you understand objections and answers to objections, your entire thinking about life will change. Until next week, I wish you health and non-capitalist prosperity. Please help me grow this channel about degrowth by clicking on the subscribe button below. I had to make this joke, but I mean it. Please subscribe. Click here to watch this video or this video to learn more.